Welcome to the Power and Excellence podcast.
You're listening to the interview, part of the Power in Excellence podcast series with Dr. John.
Hello and welcome. This is indeed the Power and Excellence podcast, and welcome to the interview. In today's conversation, I'm joined by Haleh Fardi, co-founder and chief visionary officer of ProCFO Partners, for an honest and insightful conversation about the role of the CFO, why so many organizations underestimate its importance, and how the relationship between CEO and CFO can shape the success or failure of a business. In this conversation, we explore leadership, identity, power dynamics, and even French and Raven's 5 bases of power, as well as the growing role of fractional CFOs and how they help organizations access strategic financial expertise without the cost and commitment of a full-time executive. In this conversation, Haleh shares a refreshingly candid perspective on what the CFO actually does, why the role is so often misunderstood, and the critical value that strong financial leadership brings to organizations of all sizes. As always, I began by asking Haleh a fairly simple question. What exactly does ProCFO Partners do?
ProCFO Partners is a fractional CFO firm. We place experienced financial leaders inside growing businesses, and we're very conscious of making it understood that we are there as a strategic function and not a transactional or operational function. And that's really important. For the level that we work with organizations in order to grow them, they have to understand that we're forward thinking and we are there to take their organization to the next level. We've created this IP that we call FLAS. It's Financial Leadership as a Service. And we really go into the organization saying we are not filling a role, we are here to fill a function.
So your CFOs are fractional, so they're not full-time or they're not permanent, or how does that work?
Many of them have been there with our clients for 7-8 years, but we are fractional. We really don't sell time. It's about value. You can have a full-time CFO in an organization that's a W-2 employee that brings very little value. So we also talk about that. But we are virtual or hybrid, and we are fractional. However, that being said, our clients don't experience that because we use our clients' email addresses. We respond to emails daily. We are a member of their leadership team. They don't experience us as a part-time or fractional leader.
How does that work then for an organization? Because when I think about CFOs, and I think most CFOs they've been with the business a long time, they're full-time, they've got real skin in the game, they know the business, they work really closely with all aspects of the business. If you've got somebody who is fractional, first of all, can they really have skin in the game? And how can they deliver the same kind of strategic input, the same strategic thinking when they don't really have anything on the line?
I think that is such an interesting question, and I want to answer it 2 ways. The first way is I don't think skin in the game is about hours or payroll. I think it's about the standard you're held to. And that's really important. A fractional CFO who doesn't deliver real strategic value is not going to last in an organization. The market's going to end that engagement. By the way, if you're a W-2 full-time CFO that doesn't bring in that value, you're also not going to last in an organization. Unless there's so many colors, and that's the part I want to say, of CFOs. It's like walking into a medical building and saying, I want a doctor, right? So public companies need a financial reporting type of compliance CFO. Those CFOs may not need to bring in strategic value. And many of them don't have skin in the game. There's prisons filled with them, right? So that's the first way. It's not about hours. It's about the standard you hold yourself to and the standard your client holds yourself to. What we find out, if our client does not hold us to a standard, we also don't stay. So we can come in with the standard that we hold ourselves, but if they don't see that value, they're not the right client for us. We will actually end that engagement. The second way that I want to answer that, which is very personal to me, is a good CFO actually has a hero complex, right? They want to go in and they want to be the hero. They want to solve. They imprint to the CEO's vision. And that's already embedded in that mindset of a really good CFO. They already have skin in the game, too much sometimes. So there's 2 sides of it. What type of CFO are you and what standard do you hold yourself to?
And I did want to ask you about that, what you just said just now about the different types of CFO, because for most of us, when we think about CFO, we think about, number crunchers, bean counters, whatever words people want to use to describe them. We think about people who purely deal in numbers. For you, what is a CFO?
To me, a CFO is a leader in an organization that is bringing in the information needed to frame decision making. So in my first job, I was the controller of a public company. I didn't even have a CFO title. I had to outsource the compliance side of it to a CPA because we were a public company. But even at a young age, it was about looking to the future. So a good financial leader in an organization has many small to medium businesses. Up to $400 million don't have a full-time CFO, but they have a really good controller. So let's call them financial leadership. HAS is about allowing the organization and building the architecture, the financial architecture for the organization to be able to make informed decisions. And that is what a good CFO should do, is bring in the architecture, build in the system so all the leaders of the organization have the information they need to make decisions.
So do you think a CFO holds enough power, too much power? Should they have more power? Where does the power really sit?
So I can go to one of your 1959 famous authors on power. I have learned from you and I am passionate about it. Listen to this. We have legitimate power. We have coercive power. We have reward power. We have informational power. On top of that, we have modern data power. So do I think that we are powerful? Absolutely. I think we have all forms of power and we get to use them as tools and leverage them when needed.
So who holds the real power? Is it the CEO or the CFO?
I think it's a dance. The CEO holds the vision and the CFO holds the frame. And so when I'm looking at that, the power or authority is who decides. The CFO helps the CEO on what he decides. So that's a real beautiful balance. If they really have the information, then they can decide towards what their vision is. And so I want to say it's an equal balance, because the CFO could also, a bad CFO could use their coercive power and decide something if it's not the agenda of the CEO. And I've actually been part of that when a hostile board wanted to do that, where you're saying, okay, let's not do that. It's a true partnership between the CEO and a CFO. And that's why many CFOs replace the CEO.
Which aspect of a CFO role do you think is most misunderstood?
That we just sit in the numbers, that we're backward looking. A lot of times we're brought in because their board said you need a CFO and they don't even know what a CFO does. When we started ProCFO Partners, we actually had to have a pyramid of the financial functions in an organization and the impact they have. We have many people think that your CFO, my CPA is my CFO, and then they're wondering why they're stalling. But the biggest misconception would be that we're just reporting history and we're not informing the future.
That's a really interesting point there you made about needing a CPA versus a CFO. Because I've often wondered, at what point does a company transition from just needing a CPA, needing somebody to balance the books and keep the money under control, to actually needing a CFO?
It goes back to that financial function. Many people don't even need a CPA, except for when they're filing their taxes. CPA is really about compliance. What they usually have is a controller or accountant who's been giving them the numbers, and they are back looking historically. I personally believe every organization needs a CFO from the beginning. That's why I started ProCFO Partners, because you need to have someone who's going to look at your plan, your vision through resources. What resources do you need? How do we get those resources? It is truly a missing skill set in so many organizations to look at the vision and the strategic plan through a financial lens and allocate resources and identify resources. I believe you need it right away, and bring in an attorney right away to do your operating agreement. You bring in your liability insurance right away. People just don't even know what a financial leader does in an organization, and that's why it's not brought. But let's not try to fix the world of, while I'm going out there banging on doors and educating them. They usually need it when there's an event happening. And that event can be a pain, that event can be an opportunity. And at that point, it becomes essential to bring in that skill set and that lens. So either the revenue is stagnant, they don't know what's happening to their margins, COVID has happened, an event's happened, tariffs are happening, they don't know what their margins are. They don't know how to raise prices. They don't know competitor has come into play, and they're really going to, we look at their business model with them through a financial lens. So I would say an event that's causing them some sort of emotional, whether it's joyful or fearful, that they need to really consult with a strategic financial leader.
To what extent do you think CEOs use their CFOs just for reassurance? Did they really turn to them for truth, or is it mostly for reassurance, do you think?
Depends if it's a good CEO or not, I think. Just a few days ago, I was speaking to a French-speaking friend of mine, and I was talking about the experience of working with certain CEOs. She said, oh, we have a character in France called Oui Oui. So does the CEO want a Oui Oui character? Oui Oui means yes, yes. We don't want to work with those CEOs, and we don't know that they go very far or that they are implementing the culture that most of us want to work in. For me, it's the good ones know the difference between truth, even when it costs them something. And so for a good CFO is how do you bring that truth in a way that is digestible by a visionary, sometimes bulldozer, because they don't want to hear what they don't want to hear or what stops them. How do you bring that? So a lot of times that assurance that I present or our members, our CFOs present is by asking questions and creating understanding of why they're asking the question or why they want assurance, and then providing the information.
A lot of companies that I speak to, one of the core values that they claim to espouse is transparency. Do you think companies really want financial transparency, or do they just want the illusion of being open and honest with their employees?
I think transparency is uncomfortable and it can be weaponized. Transparency depends on how it's being used. If it's an owner who wants to use it as a form of self-expression and be able to say whatever they want, I'm sure you've heard this in companies where they say to be transparent, and then something comes out like you never want to hear and it's not even real. For me, transparency is uncomfortable because when used properly, it exposes trade-off. It removes ambiguity. Many leadership teams say they want transparency and they really don't want transparency in what it reveals. I think mature organizations are different, and people who are having these conversations and answering these questions that you're asking learn to use transparency effectively. I think financial leadership is when transparency is delivered well. And that means you're not weaponizing it. I'll give you an example of that. Weaponizing it would be, we need to do X, Y, Z. To be transparent, I can't make payroll next week. What happens in that room? Suddenly from working on a business, they're like, I can't pay my mortgage. What are you talking about? And I've heard that be used as coercive power, but for a CFO to be able to just like say, so it depends on how it's used. I do believe that authenticity and transparency are critical in an organization, but it needs to be mature.
And that's a really interesting notion, isn't it, as well? Because part of the role of a CFO sometimes is to tell the story. And nobody ever wants to deliver the bad news because, as you say, sometimes that bad news, that transparency can have unforeseen consequences that nobody wants. So how do you straddle that line? How do you walk that line between telling a compelling financial story and make sure that you don't quietly reshape reality?
Many years ago, and it's still in my bookcase, I worked for an organization where we taught 2 semesters of accounting in a day. And the title of the book that is still in publication is called Accounting is Fun, Easy, and Creative. This was in pre-Enron days. People are still like, what do you mean creative? What we meant is about framing. It's about framing. And framing helps a leader absorb the hard truth without shutting down. That's how I use it. And when we were talking about authenticity and transparency, I think the way we frame our information, it's useless if it's not useful. So it causes other issues if it's not useful. So as we're doing this transparency is how do we frame it so that it informs and rather than causes fear, that it is useful information. So I don't want to say, we can't make payroll and transparency. But if we talk about a run rate and how we need to move money around and why those reasons are in a way that's framed properly, then it works. But if it comes as histrionics or alarmist or coercive, then it doesn't work.
Have you ever had to massage a message to make it more palatable?
Yes.
You don't want to elaborate on that any further?
What do you want to say? Like, it's a fine line. It's a fine line. And again, it depends on who's in the room. Who's in the room. There's a joke at my company.
You can change the name to protect the innocent.
Yeah, no, there's a joke, and we can talk about it, that I personally, as a financial leader, no longer am allowed to work with non-for-profit organizations, because there's so much feelings you have to take care of in these not-for-profit organizations. And my direct method of, I'm sorry that you've spent $500,000 on your DEI initiative. It'll never make you a penny. And then people would really start crying and saying, but we worked so hard on it. So again, the framing there was that ship has sailed. Use that information as the DNA of your reports. Use that information in your culture. So my delivery and the framing of it shouldn't have been like, what a waste of money. So I have learned to read my audience and use disc profile. And my delivery has been massaged, not the message. How about that?
I like that. But also there's a question in there, but does that $500,000 that they spent on DEI, does that have to deliver a financial reward? Because it could deliver other rewards that might not show up on your radar as a CFO.
Yes. In that particular case, it was developed as a new product offering. And so they had invested a considerable amount of money, hoping there would be a financial return on investment. And that's exactly what I was talking about earlier, to say, no, we're using it inside of the reports. It could be our unique value proposition rather than a product. We had to stop that spending. I mean, it was literally crippling the company to continue to build on something that would never have a financial return on investment. And the point of there is, in that massage, it really comes down to trust, John. At some point, they really need to trust whatever message is coming from the financial leader or CFO. I think that's the underlying of that massaging conversation, is, do they trust that the information you're bringing to them, massaged or not, is meeting the agenda and is in the best interest of the company?
And I think that's a really important point, actually, because if your audience is critical, if you, as a CFO, are presenting this information to the CEO and to the board, then there is an element of assumed trust that is there within those individuals. It's a very small group, relatively. But when you're presenting that information to a company of 2,000 people, you can't assume that same level of trust. So the message, by definition, almost has to be different, right?
Yes, it does. It really does. And it's also, again, about the adoption and understanding of the message. So it's not about diluting it, is exactly to your point. Who is the audience and what information is important to them? Why is it important to them? And so we call it gradient. Our gradient of conversation is very different inside of a business. When we're presenting to the boardroom, when we're presenting to the shareholders, it's all the same information, but again, the framing is very different. What is the information they need to know or must know, and why is it important to them?
You're listening to the Power and Excellence podcast with Dr. John.
I want to switch a wee bit. I want to pivot slightly now. I want to talk about you. So you've been a CFO, a career CFO, and now you're CEO of a company that provides CFOs. What part of your personality, either your intrinsic, your DNA as a person, or what part of your CFO personality have you had to suppress to operate effectively as a CEO?
At ProCFO Partners, my business partner, Nelson, is the CEO and I'm the CVO. But we're both former CFOs, all these C titles. And we're very equal in running and growing ProCFO Partners. So I can still answer your question, but I just needed to clarify that my title at ProCFO Partners isn't CEO, but my title at Flask Group is. So the answer is still the same. That hero complex needs to be solved. That solutioning needs to be solved. Whether we are working with our clients or in our own company, we need to give things time, strategies time to test it. And it's why our partnership has worked so well at ProCFO Partners, is because we really come from two different sides of disc profile, the DI versus the SC. So I just want to go, build, and I have an incredible sense of urgency and move forward, just do it. And my partner really has that sense of, why are we asking it, thinking about it, what are the steps in it? I would say I've had to suppress that instinct to rescue and to solve and to be a hero when I'm building my own company. It has to be outside my own ego.
What part of your identity have you really magnified or zoomed in on to exploit to be successful in your current role?
Creativity. I've been able to truly be a visionary in this organization and truly use what is my zone of genius, which is taking external information, market information, interpersonal information, to be able to build something that doesn't exist before.
What have you changed your mind about in the last few years that has really surprised you?
In business or personally?
It could be anything at all, anything you like, anything that you have changed your mind about that has made you pause and think, I'm surprised I've done that.
So for businesses, and in my business, the part that's really surprised us, that we always used to think sales solves the problem. And in my business and in my client, we don't do as much in client businesses. It's not our role. The client experience, retention, client success was the surprise. And it took about 2.5 years when we caught our attrition and retention. Is we have a solution, but that might not be the needed. Listening to the client's voice was the biggest surprise. So sales does not solve all your problems if it's a sit. So bring in a sales, lose sales, bring in sales. It's actually, I used to say, I don't want the sale. I don't want that sale, because if we're going to lose it that fast, it actually costs us much more before we hit break even, or opportunity cost even. So in terms of business, that's been the biggest surprise and learning in this last chapter for me, how the importance of hearing the client's voice, the customer's voice, and the importance of having a nurturing client success process that supports our CFOs as well as meets the client's needs. That 100% has been the learning here.
What other learnings do you think people come to too late in leadership, comfortable or uncomfortable?
They used to say in order to lead, you need to delegate, or I think having a clear vision. It's not this word that we hear so much now in our world of AI, clarity. I'm almost banning it from my company. It's like, I don't want to hear about clarity anymore. It's alignment. It's communication and alignment. And I think people don't realize that, especially if you have a leader like me. I spent 30 plus years working with really dynamic, visionary leaders, really good entrepreneurs, builders, and you did not question their vision. But half the time they didn't even know. Well, that's one of the biggest learnings. That's personally, I was working with another entrepreneur last night, and there's such an analysis paralysis. And I sat with them and said, none of us know what we're doing. So that's the personal side of your last question, where the business side of it is the importance of client success. The personal side of it is nobody knows what they're doing. And I was so intimidated by these world-class CFOs that we brought on to ProCFO Partners to work with us. And they had no clue how to work in entrepreneurial organizations. Because in entrepreneurial organizations, the finance side of it is really third down. Culture and understanding the people and the vision and asking the right questions was up. To go back to your question of what we don't know is to be able to have that dialogue. And that's the part that I talk about with our fractional leaders, is that the part in the business that used to drive the business forward was the conversations at lunch where we would say, WTF, are we doing this? While we were eating lunch, this is hard. Or on Friday nights saying, what a week. How do we make sure we don't do that next week? Why are we doing this again? And that brought clarity in quotes. But most importantly, it brought alignment. And I think that's the part people are getting too late. That team that you have needs to be aligned, knowing which direction they're rowing in. And I think that's the part that people discover too late.
You mentioned earlier on that your biggest strength that you play to in business is your creativity. What has been your biggest blind spot that has taken you by surprise?
Biggest blind spot? Trust trusting that people know what they're doing. I know I'm not the smartest person in the room, but for me, a blind spot has been believing in false bravado, because I never went forward unless I had researched, had experienced, had benchmarked, and brought 3 other ways to present, that framing that I'm talking about. And because that was my lens, I also believed that kind of diligence was done when I was getting information. So I can't say how many marketing agencies we hired. If they told me, we don't know how SEO works, but I'll figure it out with you, that would have been so much easier for us than all the ones who said they do know how Google algorithms work. And I believed in it because that's what someone said that they did. So for me, it's diligence and vetting skill sets.
I'd like to wrap up just with some rapid fire questions, if I may. What drives more decisions, fear or ambition?
Me, ambition.
Trust or control?
Trust.
Precision or persuasion?
Persuasion.
Risk-taking or reputation protection?
Risk-taking.
Being right or being effective?
Being effective.
Delegate or do yourself?
It's the wrong answer, but do yourself.
Money is what?
Money is freedom.
Power is?
Responsibility.
Leadership is?
Weight.
Failure is?
Opportunity.
Success is?
Happiness.
A great CFO is?
Happy, successful, challenged, accomplished, delivered.
And finally, a dangerous leader is?
You get to delete this. Men in power.
Why would I want to delete that?
I don't know. Maybe you'd want to delete it. A dangerous leader, I find men in power dangerous.
Do you want to expand on that?
Bad men in power.
Is your answer driven in any way by the current political climate?
No, actually, I was reading last night and it said history doesn't repeat itself, it echoes. So no, I wouldn't say it's the current, but so a dangerous leader is, their agenda is ego and self-driven. So that would be a dangerous leader, a self-driven and ego-driven agenda. That could be bad man in power, but it could be a woman who wants revenge. So that's how I would see it. A bad leader has an agenda that's myopic and self-motivated.
Haleh Fardi, CVO, CFO extraordinaire, thank you very much.
Thank you, John. As always, thank you. I love what you do, John. I want more people to hear you and listen to you and learn from you. I really do.
Remember to like and subscribe to the Power in Excellence podcast, and please share it with your friends and colleagues.